The blood-red sun sank below the dusty horizon as Rosalind Harper stood at the edge of Whispering Creek, Montana, her trembling hands clutching a letter that had traveled over 1,000 miles to find her a letter that would forever change the course of her life. The year was 1875, and at 22 years old, she had just lost everything. Rosalind folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket, wiping away tears that refused to stop falling. The letter from back east confirmed what she had feared. Her parents' estate had been claimed by creditors, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small valise of personal belongings. After traveling for weeks to reach the frontier town where her late uncle had supposedly built a life, she discovered his modest cabin had been abandoned for months, the property reclaimed by the bank. Now, as darkness descended across the vast Montana territory, Rosalind had nowhere to go. The town of Whispering Creek lay half a mile behind her, its few establishments already closing for the night. She had spent her last coins on a meager meal at the town's only restaurant, where pitying stares had followed her every move. The sound of approaching hoofbeats startled her from her thoughts. Rosalind turned quickly, instinctively stepping back toward the creek bank. A lone rider approached, his silhouette growing larger against the darkening sky. "Evening, miss," the rider called, slowing his horse to a stop several yards away. "Might be dangerous out here after dark. Coyotes get mighty curious." As he came closer, Rosalind could make out his features in the fading light. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a strong jawline partially hidden beneath a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes, kind but cautious, studied her with concern. "I'm fine, thank you," Rosalind replied, straightening her spine despite the exhaustion weighing on her limbs. The man dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Blake Callahan. I own the Double C Ranch about 3 miles west of town." He gestured to the creek. "Couldn't help but notice you seem a bit lost. Town's that way if you're looking for lodging." "I'm aware of the town's location, Mr. Callahan," Rosalind said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm simply taking a moment to myself." Blake nodded, though his expression revealed he didn't quite believe her. "Fair enough. Though I should mention the only boarding house in town's been full for days. Trail drivers came through earlier this week." Rosalind's heart sank. The boarding house had been her last hope. "I see," she said quietly. "You new to these parts?" Blake asked, removing his hat and holding it against his chest, a gesture of respect that seemed almost out of place in this rugged territory.
"Yes.
I arrived on the eastbound stage this afternoon." Blake's brow furrowed. "And you've got nowhere to stay?" When Rosalind didn't answer, he continued gently, "Madam, I don't mean to pry, but night's falling fast, and it ain't safe for anyone to be out here alone, let alone a lady." Rosalind hesitated, weighing her limited options. Pride told her to dismiss him, but practicality won out. "My situation is complicated. I came to join my uncle, Samuel Harper, but I've learned he passed some months ago." Recognition flashed in Blake's eyes.
"Sam Harper? Good man.
"Help me break horses a time or two." He shook his head. "Sorry for your loss, Miss Harper." "Thank you," Rosalind said, surprised by the genuine sympathy in his voice. Blake shifted his weight, clearly contemplating something. "My ranch isn't far. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, keeps a spare room ready for guests. You'd be welcome to stay there tonight, and tomorrow we can figure something more permanent." Rosalind stiffened. "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly impose." "It's no imposition," Blake interrupted. "Mrs. Abernathy would have my hide if I left a lady stranded out here." He smiled, the gesture transforming his weathered face. "She's a proper Boston lady herself, came out here 30 years ago. She keeps me and the ranch hands in line." The mention of a housekeeper eased Rosalind's concerns about propriety. Still, she hesitated. "Mr. Callahan, you don't know me." "I know enough," he replied simply. "You're Sam Harper's niece, and you're in need." Out here, that's all that matters. Something in his steady gaze and straightforward manner broke through Rosalind's resistance. With night rapidly approaching and no alternative, she nodded. Thank you. I accept your offer for tonight. Blake's smile widened. Good decision. He reached for her small valise. May I? After she nodded, he secured her bag to his saddle and then offered his hand. I'm afraid Thunder here will have to carry us both. Rosalind eyed the massive chestnut stallion with trepidation. I've never ridden before. Don't worry, Blake assured her, his voice gentle. Thunder's as steady as they come. With as much dignity as she could muster, Rosalind allowed Blake to help her onto the horse. Once she was settled, he swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance while still ensuring she was secure. Hold on to the saddle horn, he instructed, and then with a soft click of his tongue, Thunder began moving at an easy walk. As they rode in silence, Rosalind became acutely aware of Blake's presence, the solid warmth of him, the scent of leather and open air that clung to his clothes. Despite her circumstances, she found herself oddly comforted by his quiet strength. They crested a small rise, and the Double C Ranch came into view. Even in the growing darkness, Rosalind could make out a substantial main house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Lights glowed from the windows, a welcoming beacon in the vast emptiness of the frontier. It's not much compared to what you might be used to back east, Blake said, misinterpreting her silence. But it's home. It's beautiful, Rosalind replied honestly, struck by the peaceful scene before her. As they approached, a stout woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her expression shifted from curiosity to concern as she spotted Rosalind. Blake Callahan. Who've you brought home this time? She called, her voice carrying easily across the yard. Blake chuckled. Evening, Mrs. Abernathy. This is Miss Rosalind Harper, Sam Harper's niece from back east. She needs a place to stay tonight. Mrs. Abernathy's face softened immediately. Oh, you poor dear.
Come in.
I've got stew keeping warm and fresh bread just out of the oven. Blake dismounted first, then gently helped Rosalind down. Her legs wobbled slightly after the ride, and his hand lingered on her elbow until she steadied herself. Thank you, she murmured, suddenly shy under Mrs. Abernathy's curious gaze. Get yourself inside, Miss Harper, the older woman instructed kindly. Blake will see to your bag. Rosalind followed Mrs. Abernathy into a spacious kitchen filled with delicious aromas. The housekeeper gestured for her to sit at a large wooden table while she bustled about, preparing a bowl of stew and slicing fresh bread. Eat now, talk later, Mrs. Abernathy insisted, placing the food before Rosalind. You look half-starved, child. Only then did Rosalind realize how hungry she truly was. She ate gratefully while Mrs. Abernathy kept up a steady stream of chatter about the ranch and the town. Blake entered as she was finishing, having taken care of Thunder and her valise. He accepted a bowl of stew from Mrs. Abernathy and sat across from Rosalind. Mrs. Abernathy, Miss Harper will be staying in the guest room tonight, he said between bites. She came to join her uncle, not knowing he'd passed. Oh, my dear, Mrs. Abernathy said, patting Rosalind's hand. Sam was a good soul. We were all saddened when fever took him last winter. Rosalind nodded, fighting back tears. I hadn't seen him since I was a child, but he always wrote such wonderful letters about Montana. Did you have plans beyond joining your uncle? Blake asked gently. Rosalind hesitated, uncomfortable revealing the full extent of her misfortune. I had hoped to make a fresh start here. Well, you've come to the right place for that, Mrs. Abernathy declared. This territory's full of folks making new beginnings. After the meal, Mrs. Abernathy showed Rosalind to a small but comfortable bedroom. You rest now, the housekeeper said kindly. Things always look brighter in the morning. Alone at last, Rosalind sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to process the day's events. Despite her dire circumstances, she felt an odd sense of peace. Perhaps it was the kindness of strangers, or perhaps it was simply relief at having found shelter for the night. As she unpacked her meager belongings, she came across her father's pocket watch, the last remnant of her former life. Clutching it tightly, she whispered a silent prayer for guidance before finally surrendering to exhaustion. Morning came with the sounds of a working ranch, distant cattle lowing, horses nickering, men calling to one another as they began their day's work. Rosalind dressed quickly in her second-best dress, arranging her auburn hair as neatly as possible before venturing downstairs. She found Blake and Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen, both looking up as she entered. "Good morning, Miss Harper," Blake greeted her, rising from his chair. "I trust you slept well?" "Very well, thank you," Rosalind replied. "And please call me Rosalind." Blake nodded, a small smile playing at his lips.
Rosalind, then.
"And I'm Blake." Mrs. Abernathy set a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "Eat up, dear. You'll need your strength." As they ate, Blake outlined his plan. "I need to ride into town this morning. I can make inquiries about work for you, if you'd like." Rosalind straightened her shoulders. "That's very kind, but I should go myself." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Call Blake." "What skills do you have, dear?" Mrs. Abernathy asked practically. "I was a teacher's assistant in Boston," Rosalind replied. "I'm educated, I can keep accounts, and I'm a fair seamstress." Blake nodded thoughtfully. Whispering Creek's growing. The mercantile might need help, or perhaps the school could use another teacher. "There's also Mrs. Wilson's boarding house," Mrs. Abernathy added. "She's always complaining about needing an extra pair of hands." Hope flickered in Rosalind's chest. "I'm willing to try anything." Blake rose from the table. "We'll ride in together, then. I have business at the bank and with the blacksmith." An hour later, they were on their way to town, Rosalind riding a gentle mare Blake had assured her was perfect for beginners. The morning was crisp and clear, the vast Montana landscape stretching endlessly around them. "It's beautiful here," Rosalind commented, taking in the rolling hills and distant mountains. Blake nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon with obvious pride. "Takes some getting used to after the city, I imagine, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked. 8 years now, he replied. "Started with just 50 acres and a dozen cattle. Built it up little by little." He glanced at her. "What about you? What brought you all the way from Boston besides your uncle?" Rosalind hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "My father died 6 months ago. He had financial troubles I wasn't aware of. When the creditors came, they took everything." She straightened in the saddle. Uncle Samuel had always written about opportunities here. It seemed like Providence. Blake's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry about your father and your situation. But your uncle was right, there are opportunities here for those willing to work hard." "I am," Rosalind assured him. "More than willing." They reached town just as businesses were opening. Whispering Creek was small but growing, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, including a general store, saloon, small bank, blacksmith, sheriff's office, and a few other establishments. "Let's try the mercantile first," Blake suggested, helping Rosalind dismount in front of a large store with Peterson's General Merchandise painted across its facade. Inside, they found Mr. Peterson, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose, arranging a display of fabric. "Morning, Blake," he greeted cheerfully. "What brings you in today?" "Morning, Thomas. This is Miss Rosalind Harper, Sam Harper's niece from Boston. She's looking for employment in town." Mr. Peterson's expression turned sympathetic. "Sorry to hear about your uncle, Miss Harper." "Fine man." He shook his head regretfully. "Wish I could help with work, but business has been slow lately. I can't justify another wage." Rosalind tried to hide her disappointment. I understand. Thank you anyway. Their next stops yielded similar results. The school already had a teacher, the boarding house couldn't afford help, and no one else seemed to need assistance. By midday, Rosalind's hopes had dimmed considerably. Let's get some lunch, Blake suggested as they left the dressmaker's shop. Things might look different on a full stomach. They settled at a small table in the town's only restaurant. As they waited for their food, Blake studied Rosalind's downcast expression. Don't lose heart, he said gently. Something will turn up. Rosalind managed a small smile. You've been very kind, Blake. I don't know how to thank you. No need for thanks, he replied simply. It's what neighbors do. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the window, they could see a woman struggling with several packages while trying to control a spirited horse. Blake was on his feet immediately. That's Sarah Jenkins. Excuse me. Rosalind watched as he hurried outside to assist the woman, easily calming the horse before helping gather her dropped packages. The woman's relief was evident, and she spoke animatedly to Blake for several minutes before they parted ways. When Blake returned, Rosalind raised an eyebrow. Another damsel in distress rescued? Blake chuckled. Sarah's husband broke his leg last week. She's trying to manage their small horse farm alone until he heals. He paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. She mentioned needing help with correspondence and accounts. Her husband usually handles that side of things. Rosalind straightened. Correspondence and accounts? I could certainly help with that. Blake's eyes lit up. Let's finish eating, and then we'll ride out to the Jenkins place. It's worth asking. The Jenkins farm was a modest property about 2 miles outside town. Several corrals held beautiful horses of various breeds, and a neat farmhouse stood surrounded by flowering bushes. Sarah Jenkins met them on the porch, her eyes widening at the sight of Rosalind. She was a pleasant-looking woman in her 30s, with blonde hair escaping from a practical bun. Blake Callahan, twice in one day? To what do I owe this pleasure? She smiled curiously at Rosalind. Blake introduced them, explaining Rosalind's situation and skills. When you mentioned needing help with the accounts and correspondence, I thought of Miss Harper immediately. Sarah's expression brightened.
Oh,
that would be wonderful. Robert's laid up for at least another month, and I'm hopeless with numbers. Plus, we've breeding records that need updating and letters to clients that should have gone out days ago. I'd be happy to help, Rosalind said eagerly. I kept all the accounts for my father's household and handled his correspondence as well. The question is, Blake interjected, do you have a place for Miss Harper to stay? She's just arrived and hasn't secured lodging yet. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. We have a small room off the kitchen. It's not fancy, but it's private and comfortable. You'd be welcome to it, Miss Harper, in exchange for your help with the books and a few household duties. Relief washed over Rosalind. That would be perfect, Mrs. Jenkins. Please call me Sarah, the woman insisted. When can you start? Immediately, if that suits you, Rosalind replied, hardly believing her luck. Within the hour, arrangements had been made. Blake helped bring Rosalind's valise from his saddlebags, and Sarah showed her to the small but clean room that would be her new home. I'll leave you to get settled, Sarah said warmly. Supper's at 6, and we can discuss your duties then. When Sarah left, Blake lingered in the doorway. Looks like things worked out after all, he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. Thanks to you, Rosalind replied gratefully. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. You'd have managed, he said with certainty. You strike me as a woman who doesn't give up easily. Their eyes met, and Rosalind felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. There was something about Blake Callahan, a quiet strength, an innate kindness that drew her to him. Will I see you again? She asked impulsively, then blushed at her forwardness. Blake's smile widened. The Double C does business with the Jenkins regularly. I suspect our paths will cross often. He tipped his hat. "Good day, Rosalind Harper. I look forward to seeing you again soon." As he left, Rosalind stood in the doorway of her new room, watching his tall figure stride toward his horse. Against all odds, she had found not only employment and lodging but also, perhaps, a friend. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Rosalind settled into life at the Jenkins farm. The work suited her perfectly, organizing accounts, writing letters to clients, and helping Sarah with household tasks. Robert Jenkins, confined to a chair with his broken leg, proved to be a kind employer who appreciated her efficiency. True to his word, Blake visited the farm regularly. Sometimes his visits had clear business purposes, discussing horse purchases or breeding arrangements. Other times, his reasons seemed less defined, and Rosalind couldn't help but notice his eyes seeking her out whenever he arrived. One warm afternoon in late May, Rosalind was hanging laundry when Blake rode up. Sarah had gone to town with Robert, who was finally mobile enough to travel short distances. "Afternoon, Rosalind," Blake called, dismounting smoothly. Today he wore a blue shirt that matched his eyes, making them appear even more striking against his sun-bronzed skin. "Hello, Blake," she replied, trying to ignore the way her heart quickened at the sight of him. "Sarah and Robert aren't here, I'm afraid." "Actually, I came to see you," he admitted, removing his hat. "I wondered if you might like to ride out to Falcon Ridge with me. The view's spectacular, and it's a perfect day for it." Rosalind hesitated. "I should finish the laundry, it'll wait," Blake said, his smile coaxing. "You've been working non-stop since you arrived. Surely you deserve an afternoon off." The temptation was too great to resist. "Let me change my apron and leave a note for Sarah." 20 minutes later, they were riding side by side through rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. Rosalind had become a competent rider under Sarah's tutelage, and she enjoyed the freedom of moving confidently on horseback. "You've taken to riding like you were born to it," Blake observed, approval evident in his voice. Rosalind laughed. "I still have much to learn, but I do love it. There's something exhilarating about the connection between horse and rider." "Exactly," Blake agreed. "That's what drew me to ranching. Well, that, and the land itself." They rode in comfortable silence for a while before Blake spoke again. "How are you finding life in Montana Territory?" "Still miss Boston." Rosalind considered the question. "I miss certain things, bookshops, theaters, the familiarity of it all. But honestly, I feel more alive here than I ever did there." "How so?" Blake asked, genuine interest in his expression. "In Boston, everything was
Prescribed.
My future was set, marry well, maintain a proper household, participate in suitable social activities." She gestured to the vast landscape around them. "Here, I feel as though I can breathe. I'm judged by my actions, not my family name or social connections." Blake nodded thoughtfully. "The frontier has a way of stripping away pretenses. Out here, a person's word and work ethic matter more than their background." "Exactly," Rosalind agreed. "Though I imagine it was difficult building your ranch from nothing." A shadow crossed Blake's face. "It wasn't easy. Lost almost everything in the first winter livestock crops. Nearly gave up." His expression softened. "But something kept me going. A stubborn belief that this was where I belonged." "And now you have one of the most successful ranches in the territory," Rosalind said admiringly. Blake shrugged modestly. "I've been fortunate. And I've had good people working alongside me." They crested a hill, and Rosalind gasped at the view. Falcon Ridge overlooked a vast valley, with mountains rising majestically in the distance. A river wound like a silver ribbon through the lush landscape, and herds of wild horses could be seen grazing peacefully below. "Oh, Blake," she breathed. "It's magnificent." They dismounted, and Blake spread a blanket on the ground. From his saddlebags, he produced bread, cheese, and dried fruit. "Thought you might be hungry." They ate companionably, the conversation flowing easily between them. Rosalind found herself sharing stories from her childhood and Blake spoke of his dreams for expanding his ranch. "I'd like to build a bigger house someday," he admitted. "The current one was fine when it was just me and a couple of hands, but now—"
Now.
Rosalind prompted when he trailed off. Blake met her eyes, something vulnerable in his gaze. A man starts thinking about the future, about family. Rosalind's heart skipped a beat. Before she could respond, Blake pointed to the sky. "Look, a golden eagle." They watched the majestic bird soar overhead, its wingspan impressive against the blue sky. The moment passed, but Rosalind felt something had shifted between them, some unspoken understanding. As the sun began its descent, they reluctantly packed up and mounted their horses for the return journey. Blake led them along a different route, following the river for a stretch before cutting across a meadow ablaze with wildflowers. "One more surprise," he said with a smile, directing her toward a small grove of trees. As they approached, Rosalind heard the unmistakable sound of rushing water. Through the trees, she glimpsed a waterfall cascading into a clear pool. "It's beautiful," she said, dismounting to approach the water's edge. "My secret spot," Blake admitted, joining her. "I come here when I need to think." Rosalind dipped her fingers into the cool water. "Thank you for sharing it with me." When she looked up, Blake was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might move closer, might even kiss her. Instead, he glanced at the setting sun. "We should head back," he said reluctantly. "It'll be dark soon." The ride back was quieter, both lost in their thoughts. When they reached the Jenkins farm, lights glowed warmly in the windows, indicating Sarah and Robert had returned. Blake helped Rosalind dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for coming with me today," he said softly. "Thank you for asking me," she replied, equally quiet. Before either could say more, the front door opened and Sarah called out, "Rosalind? Is that you? Supper's almost ready." "Coming," Rosalind called back. To Blake, she said, "Would you like to join us?" He shook his head regretfully. "I should get back. Ranch hands will be wondering where I've gone." He hesitated, then added, "There's a dance in town next Saturday. Would you allow me to escort you?" Joy bubbled up inside her. "I'd like that very much." Blake's smile was brilliant in the fading light. "I'll call for you at 6 then." As he rode away, Rosalind hugged herself, unable to contain her happiness. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt not just hopeful but genuinely excited about the future. Inside, Sarah took one look at her flushed cheeks and bright eyes and smiled knowingly. "Had a nice ride with Blake, did you?" Rosalind nodded, helping set the table to hide her blush. "He showed me Falcon Ridge and the waterfall by Silver Creek." "Did he now?" Sarah exchanged a meaningful glance with Robert. "He doesn't take just anyone to those places." "He asked me to the dance on Saturday," Rosalind admitted, unable to keep the news to herself. Robert chuckled.
About time.
"He's been finding every excuse to ride over here since you arrived." "Robert," Sarah scolded, though her eyes twinkled. "Don't embarrass the girl." As they ate supper, Rosalind found herself daydreaming about the upcoming dance. She had one good dress she'd managed to save from her former life, a blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes. It would need pressing, but it would do nicely for a country dance. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Rosalind threw herself into her work, updating all the breeding records and writing responses to inquiries about the Jenkins prize stallion. In the evenings, she helped Sarah with household tasks, grateful for the woman's friendship and guidance. By Saturday, Rosalind was nearly vibrating with anticipation. She bathed carefully, using a precious drop of rose water behind her ears. Sarah helped her arrange her hair in an elegant style, with soft curls framing her face. "You look beautiful," Sarah declared as Rosalind twirled in her blue silk dress. Blake won't know what hit him. When a knock came at precisely 6 o'clock, Rosalind's stomach fluttered with nerves. Sarah winked at her before opening the door to reveal Blake, looking incredibly handsome in a clean black suit and crisp white shirt. His eyes widened appreciatively as they fell on Rosalind. "You look stunning," he said, his voice slightly husky. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "You look very handsome yourself." Robert appeared from the sitting room, leaning on his cane. "Have her home by midnight, Callahan," he said with mock sternness. Blake nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir." Outside, Rosalind was surprised to see not horses, but a smart buggy waiting for them. "I thought we might appreciate a more comfortable ride to town," Blake explained, helping her up. The dance was held in the town hall, a large wooden building decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers for the occasion. A small band played lively tunes, and it seemed the entire population of Whispering Creek and surrounding ranches had turned out for the event. As they entered, Blake kept his hand at the small of Rosalind's back, a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. She was aware of curious glances and whispers. Blake Callahan, the confirmed bachelor rancher, with Sam Harper's Eastern niece on his arm. "Would you like some punch?" Blake asked, steering her toward a refreshment table. "Yes, please," Rosalind replied, grateful for a moment to catch her breath. While Blake fetched their drinks, a friendly-looking woman approached Rosalind. "You must be Miss Harper. I'm Margaret Wilson. I run the boarding house in town." "Pleased to meet you," Rosalind said politely. "I understand you're working for the Jenkins," Mrs. Wilson continued. "How are you finding our little corner of Montana?" "I'm enjoying it very much," Rosalind replied sincerely. "Everyone has been so welcoming." Mrs. Wilson's eyes twinkled as she glanced toward Blake. "Especially our most eligible rancher, it seems." Before Rosalind could respond, Blake returned with 2 cups of punch. "Evening, Mrs. Wilson," he greeted politely. "Blake Callahan, you've been holding out on us," the older woman teased. "No one mentioned Miss Harper was such a beauty." Blake's eyes met Rosalind's. No description could do her justice. The simple compliment sent warmth flooding through Rosalind. Mrs. Wilson excused herself with a knowing smile, leaving them alone again. "I should warn you," Blake said, handing Rosalind her punch. "In a town this size, people notice everything. By tomorrow, half the territory will be speculating about us." "Does that bother you?" Rosalind asked, suddenly uncertain. Blake's expression grew serious. "Not at all." "Does it bother you?" She shook her head.
No.
The band struck up a waltz, and Blake set aside their empty cups. "May I have this dance, Miss Harper?" Rosalind placed her hand in his. "You may, Mr. Callahan." Blake led her onto the dance floor with surprising grace for a man who spent most of his days on horseback. His hand was warm at her waist, and he held her at a proper distance, close enough for connection but far enough to maintain respectability. "You dance beautifully," Rosalind commented as he guided her through the steps. "My mother insisted I learn," Blake replied with a smile. "Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo." Rosalind laughed. "Wise woman, your mother." "She was," Blake agreed, a flicker of sadness crossing his features. "Lost her 5 years ago. Father's been gone longer, 10 years this fall." "I'm sorry," Rosalind said softly, understanding the pain of loss all too well. They danced in companionable silence for a while, the music swelling around them. Rosalind was acutely aware of Blake's presence, the strength in his hand at her waist, the faint scent of bay rum and leather that clung to him, the way his eyes rarely left her face. When the waltz ended, they joined other couples at the edge of the dance floor. Blake introduced Rosalind to several of his neighbors and business associates, his pride in her evident in every introduction. The evening passed in a whirl of dances, conversations, and laughter. Rosalind couldn't remember when she'd last enjoyed herself so thoroughly. Back in Boston, social events had been exercises in proper behavior and political maneuvering. Here, people simply gathered to enjoy each other's company. As the night wore on, Blake led Rosalind outside for a breath of fresh air. The stars blazed overhead, more brilliant than she'd ever seen them in the city. "Enjoying yourself?" Blake asked, his voice low. "Very much," Rosalind replied honestly. "Everyone's been so kind." "They like you," Blake said simply. "You fit in here better than you might think." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, gazing at the star-filled sky. When Rosalind shivered slightly in the cool night air, Blake removed his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured, touched by the gesture. Blake turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. "Rosalind, whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the town's doctor, who emerged from the hall looking for Blake. "Sorry to disturb you, but one of your ranch hands just rode in. There's trouble at the double, see something about cattle rustlers." Blake's expression hardened immediately. "I need to go."
I'm sorry, Rosalind.
"Of course," she said, understanding the urgency.
Don't worry about me.
"I can get a ride home with someone else." "I'll take her back to the Jenkins place," the doctor offered. "My rounds take me that way anyhow." Blake hesitated, clearly torn between duty and his promise to see her home. "Are you sure?" "Go," Rosalind insisted. "Your ranch needs you." Blake took her hand, pressing it briefly to his lips. "I'll come see you tomorrow if I can." Then he was gone, striding quickly toward where his buggy waited. Rosalind watched him leave, her hand still tingling from the touch of his lips. The doctor cleared his throat gently. "He's a good man, Miss Harper. One of the best in these parts." "Yes," Rosalind agreed softly. "I believe he is." The ride back to the Jenkins farm was quiet, Rosalind lost in thoughts of the evening and worries about what Blake might be facing at his ranch. Cattle rustling was a serious offense in the territory, often met with deadly force. Sarah was still awake when Rosalind arrived, eager to hear about the dance. Despite her concerns for Blake, Rosalind found herself smiling as she recounted the evening. "And then he was called away something about cattle rustlers at his ranch," she concluded. Sarah's expression grew concerned. "That's troubling. Rustling's been on the rise lately." She patted Rosalind's hand. "Try not to worry. Blake can handle himself, and he has good men working for him." But worry she did, tossing and turning most of the night. Morning came with no word from Blake, and Rosalind threw herself into her work, trying to distract herself from her concern. By late afternoon, she was helping Sarah in the vegetable garden when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up hopefully. But it wasn't Blake who rode up, it was one of his ranch hands, a young man named Timothy. "Miss Harper," he called, dismounting quickly. "Mr. Callahan sent me with a message." Rosalind wiped her hands on her apron, heart pounding. "Is he all right?" Timothy nodded. "Yes, madam. Just busy. We caught one of the rustlers, but the others got away with a dozen head of cattle. Sheriff's at the ranch now, taking statements." He held out a folded piece of paper. "He asked me to give you this." Rosalind took the note with slightly trembling fingers. "Thank you, Timothy. He also said to tell you he's sorry he couldn't come himself," the young man added. "Been up all night tracking those rustlers." After Timothy departed, Rosalind unfolded the note and read Blake's strong, clear handwriting. "Rosalind, I'm sorry for leaving so abruptly last night and for not coming to see you today as promised. The situation here is under control, but demands my attention for a while longer. Please know that I treasured every moment of our evening together. I hope to see you very soon. Yours, Blake." The simple note warmed her heart, especially the "yours" at the end. She tucked it carefully into her pocket and returned to helping Sarah, a smile playing at her lips despite her lingering concern. 3 days passed with no sign of Blake. Rosalind tried to focus on her work, but found herself watching the road whenever she was outside. On the 4th day, Sarah sent her to town with a list of supplies they needed from the mercantile. As Rosalind was loading her purchases into the Jenkins wagon, A familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Blake striding toward her, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Blake," she exclaimed, unable to hide her joy. "You're all right." "I am," he confirmed, reaching her side. "I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner. Things have been chaotic at the ranch." Rosalind studied his face, noting the fatigue in his eyes and the new cut along his jawline. "You're hurt." Blake touched the wound dismissively. "It's nothing. I caught a branch while riding at night." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Rosalind didn't press. "Did they catch the other rustlers?" "Not yet," Blake replied grimly. "But Sheriff Taylor has some leads." He changed the subject, his expression softening. "I've missed you." The simple admission made Rosalind's heart soar. "I've missed you too." Blake glanced at the wagon. "Heading back to the Jenkins place?" Rosalind nodded. Sarah needed supplies. "Mind if I ride along?" he asked. "I'd like to speak with Robert about a horse I'm interested in." They rode side by side, Blake on his horse and Rosalind driving the wagon. The conversation flowed easily between them, as if they'd known each other for years rather than weeks. At the Jenkins farm, Blake spoke briefly with Robert while Rosalind helped Sarah unload the supplies. When he found her in the kitchen, his expression was uncharacteristically nervous. "Rosalind, I was wondering if you might join me for supper tomorrow night," he said. "At my ranch. Mrs. Abernathy is threatening to disown me if I don't bring you around soon." Rosalind smiled, pleased by the invitation. "I'd love to." "Good," Blake said, relief evident in his voice. "I'll come for you at 5. After he left, Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, her expression knowing. "Supper at the Callahan ranch, Things are progressing nicely." Rosalind blushed. "It's just supper." Sarah laughed. "Oh, my dear. When a man like Blake Callahan invites a woman to his home, it's never just anything." The next evening, Rosalind dressed with particular care in her best day dress, a sage green that complemented her auburn hair. Sarah lent her a pretty shawl embroidered with wildflowers, insisting the nights could still be chilly. Blake arrived promptly at 5, his buggy freshly polished and a bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. "These reminded me of you," he said, presenting them to Rosalind. "Beautiful but sturdy enough to thrive in this harsh land." The drive to the Double C was pleasant, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow over the landscape. As they approached the ranch, Rosalind was struck again by its beauty, the well-maintained buildings, the healthy cattle grazing in verdant pastures, the sense of purpose and prosperity that permeated the place. Mrs. Abernathy met them at the door, her face creasing in a broad smile. "About time you brought this lovely girl around again, Blake Callahan."
Come in.
"Supper's nearly ready." The housekeeper had outdone herself, preparing a feast of roast beef, fresh vegetables from her garden, and hot rolls that filled the house with their tantalizing aroma. The dining room table was set with the ranch's best china and silverware, and fresh flowers adorned the center. Throughout the meal, Rosalind noticed Blake watching her nod in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a warmth that made her feel cherished. Mrs. Abernathy kept the conversation flowing, regaling Rosalind with stories of Blake's early days at the ranch. "You should have seen him," the housekeeper chuckled. "City boy trying to rope cattle. Spent more time face down in the mud than on his horse those first few months." "Mrs. Abernathy," Blake protested good-naturedly. "You'll ruin my reputation." "Your reputation's solid enough to withstand a few embarrassing stories," the older woman replied with a wink at Rosalind. After dinner, Mrs. Abernathy shooed them out onto the porch with coffee. "You young people don't want an old woman hovering. Go enjoy the sunset." They sat on the porch swing, their shoulders not quite touching, watching as the sky transformed into a canvas of pink, orange, and purple. The ranch hands were returning from their day's work, tipping their hats respectfully to Rosalind as they passed. "Your ranch is beautiful, Blake," Rosalind said softly. "You've built something truly special here." Blake's gaze was distant, taking in his property with evident pride. It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every struggle. He turned to look at her. Would you like to see more of it? There's still enough light for a short walk. They strolled past the barn and corrals, Blake pointing out features of the ranch and introducing Rosalind to his prized horses. His passion for his work was evident in every word, every gesture. And this, he said, leading her to a hill overlooking the ranch, is where I plan to build someday. Rosalind looked out over the stunning vista. Build what? A proper house, Blake replied. Something bigger with more rooms. He paused, then added quietly, a family home. The implication hung in the air between them. Rosalind's heart raced as Blake turned to face her, his expression earnest. Rosalind, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. From the moment I saw you standing by that creek, something told me you were special. Blake, she began, but he gently placed a finger on her lips. Let me finish, please. I'm not asking for promises or commitments yet. I just want you to know that I care for you deeply, and I hope you might give me the chance to court you properly. Relief and joy washed over Rosalind. I was afraid you'd say you were too busy with your ranch for romantic entanglements. Blake chuckled. My ranch is important to me, but a man needs more than work to make life worthwhile. He took her hands in his. What do you say, Rosalind Harper? Will you allow me to court you? Yes, she replied without hesitation. I'd like that very much. Blake's smile was radiant as he slowly leaned forward, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, he pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, chaste kiss that nevertheless sent her heart racing. When they parted, Blake rested his forehead against hers. I should get you back to the Jenkins place before they send out a search party. The ride back was quiet but comfortable, both lost in their own thoughts yet perfectly content in each other's company. When they arrived, Blake helped Rosalind down from the buggy, holding her hands a moment longer than necessary. Thank you for a wonderful evening, she said softly. The first of many, I hope, he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. As Rosalind watched him drive away, she felt a sense of peace and rightness she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since leaving Boston, she began to think of Montana not just as a refuge, but as home. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness for Rosalind. Blake called on her regularly, taking her on picnics, to town dances, and on rides exploring the beautiful countryside. Their relationship deepened with each meeting, built on mutual respect, shared laughter, and growing affection. By late summer, it was common knowledge throughout Whispering Creek that Blake Callahan was courting Rosalind Harper, and most agreed they'd never seen the rancher so happy. Robert's leg healed completely, allowing him to resume his duties at the horse farm. Though he and Sarah insisted Rosalind was welcome to stay on, she began to feel she should find her own way. When the position of schoolteacher unexpectedly opened up in mid-August, Rosalind applied and was hired immediately, her education and experience making her the ideal candidate. It's perfect, Blake said when she told him the news. You'll be wonderful with the children. The schoolteacher's position came with a small cabin behind the schoolhouse, modest, but clean and entirely her own. Blake and several ranch hands helped her move in, Blake presenting her with a rocking chair he'd commissioned from the town's carpenter as a housewarming gift. So you'll have somewhere comfortable to sit while grading papers, he explained as the chair was placed in the corner of her small sitting room. School began in September and Rosalind discovered she loved teaching. Her 15 students, ranging in age from 6 to 16, were eager to learn despite the challenges of frontier life. Many rode miles on horseback each day to attend, and all had chores waiting at home, yet they approached their studies with determination and curiosity that inspired her. Blake often rode into town after school let out, sometimes bringing small treats for the children or offering to help with repairs around the schoolhouse. The students adored him, especially the boys, who peppered him with questions about ranching and horses. One crisp October afternoon, Rosalind was erasing the chalkboard after dismissing her students when Blake appeared in the doorway. "Hard at work, Miss Harper?" he teased, leaning against the doorframe. Rosalind smiled, setting down the eraser. "Always. What brings you to town today?" "You," he replied simply, entering the classroom. "And I was hoping you might join me for a ride. There's something I'd like to show you." Intrigued, Rosalind agreed. They rode out of town toward the Double C, but Blake veered off on a trail she hadn't taken before. After about 20 minutes, they came to a small, pristine lake surrounded by aspen trees whose leaves had turned brilliant gold. "It's beautiful," Rosalind breathed, dismounting to better appreciate the view. Blake joined her, taking her hand as they walked along the shore. "My father showed me this place when I first came west. Said he proposed to my mother here." Rosalind's heart skipped a beat at the mention of proposals, but Blake continued walking, seemingly lost in memories. They rounded a bend, and Rosalind gasped. There, in a small clearing, was a picnic blanket spread with food, a bottle of wine, and a vase of late-blooming wildflowers. "Blake," she said, turning to him in surprise. "You planned all this?" He nodded, a hint of nervousness in his smile. "With Mrs. Abernathy's help. She rode out earlier to set everything up." They settled on the blanket, and Blake poured wine into 2 glasses. "To new beginnings," he toasted. "To new beginnings," Rosalind echoed, touched by his thoughtfulness. They ate and talked as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the lake. When they had finished, Blake grew uncharacteristically quiet. "Is everything all right?" Rosalind asked, concerned by his sudden seriousness. Blake took her hands in his. "Everything is perfect, which is why this is the right moment for what I need to say." He took a deep breath. "Rosalind Harper, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought joy and meaning to days that once were filled with nothing but work." Rosalind's breath caught as Blake reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I love you, Rosalind. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you've embraced this new life and made it your own." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of happiness filled Rosalind's eyes. "Yes, Blake. Yes, I will marry you." Blake's face lit up with joy as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the late afternoon sunlight and sending prisms of color dancing across their joined hands. "It was my mother's," Blake explained. "My father gave it to me before he died, saying I should save it for the woman who captured my heart as completely as my mother had captured his." "It's beautiful," Rosalind said softly. "I'll treasure it always." Blake drew her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke volumes about his feelings. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy, Rosalind." "You already do," she replied, her heart so full it felt it might burst. They stayed by the lake until the first stars appeared, making plans for their future together. Blake wanted a December wedding, before the worst of winter set in. Rosalind agreed, thinking how perfect it would be to begin their married life during the season of hope and new beginnings. When they finally rode back to town, the news of their engagement spread quickly. Sarah and Robert were among the first to congratulate them, Sarah hugging Rosalind fiercely while Robert shook Blake's hand. "We knew from the start you two were meant for each other," Sarah declared, wiping away happy tears. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. Rosalind continued teaching while planning the wedding with help from Sarah, Mrs. Abernathy, and other women in the community. Blake began work on expanding his house, adding 2 new bedrooms and enlarging the kitchen and sitting room to create a home worthy of his bride. As their wedding day approached, Rosalind found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. She had arrived in Whispering Creek broken and desperate, with nothing but uncertainty ahead. Now, she was beloved by her students, respected in the community, and about to marry a man who cherished her completely. The day before the wedding, Blake found her at the schoolhouse, arranging greenery and ribbons for the ceremony, which would take place there the following afternoon. "Need any help?" he asked, watching her from the doorway. Rosalind smiled, setting down her scissors. "I thought it was bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the wedding." "That's on the wedding day," Blake corrected, entering the room. "Besides, I don't believe in luck. I believe in us." He crossed to where she stood, taking her hands in his. "Are you happy, Rosalind?" "Truly happy." "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she assured him. "Why do you ask?" Blake's expression was serious. "I just want to be certain you have no regrets. Marrying me means a life here, far from the comforts and culture you grew up with." Rosalind placed her palm against his cheek. "Blake Callahan, the only thing I regret is that I didn't find you sooner. Everything I need is right here, you, our home, this community. I wouldn't trade this life for all the drawing rooms and theaters in Boston." Relief washed over his features. "I love you," he said simply. "And I love you," she replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. Their wedding day dawned clear and cold, the December sun casting a crystalline light over the snow-covered landscape. The schoolhouse had been transformed with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles that glowed warmly against the winter darkness that fell early. Sarah helped Rosalind dress in her wedding gown, a creation of ivory silk that had been Sarah's own, carefully altered to fit Rosalind's slimmer frame. Her auburn hair was arranged in an elegant knot, adorned with small white flowers that Mrs. Abernathy had somehow coaxed to bloom in her greenhouse despite the season. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, adjusting the veil. Blake won't know what hit him. As Rosalind stood before the small mirror in the room behind the schoolhouse, a wave of emotion swept over her. "I wish my parents could be here," she said softly. Sarah squeezed her hand. "They are, dear. In the ways that matter most." Robert knocked gently on the door. In the absence of her father, he had offered to escort Rosalind down the aisle. "Ready?" he asked, his eyes widening at the sight of her. "My word, you're a vision." The schoolhouse was packed with people. Every resident of Whispering Creek and many from surrounding farms and ranches had come to witness the union of Blake Callahan and Rosalind Harper. Children sat cross-legged at the front, Rosalind's students beaming with pride that their teacher was the center of attention. Blake stood at the front of the room beside the circuit preacher who had ridden 3 days to perform the ceremony. He wore a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. When Rosalind appeared in the doorway on Robert's arm, Blake's expression transformed with wonder and love. The ceremony was simple but profoundly moving. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and certain in the hushed room. When Blake slipped a gold band onto Rosalind's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands trembled slightly, the only outward sign of the powerful emotions he was feeling. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." Blake gathered Rosalind gently into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of even the most stoic ranchers present. When they turned to face their friends as Mr. and Mrs. Blake Callahan, the schoolhouse erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every household. There was music and dancing, laughter, and a few happy tears as the community celebrated not just a wedding but the love story that had unfolded before their eyes over the past months. As the evening wore on, Blake led Rosalind outside for a moment of quiet. Snow had begun to fall gently, adding to the magical quality of the day. "Happy, Mrs. Callahan?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Completely, Mr. Callahan," she replied, leaning into his embrace. Blake kissed her temple. "I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Rosalind unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket. Opening it, she found a tiny sketch of Blake on one side and a lock of his hair on the other. "It's beautiful," she whispered, deeply touched. "So, even when I'm away working the ranch, you'll have me close to your heart," Blake explained, helping her fasten it around her neck. Rosalind touched the locket reverently. "I'll never take it off." They rejoined the celebration, dancing and laughing with their friends until it was time to depart. Amid a shower of rice and good wishes, Blake helped Rosalind into his buggy, now decorated with ribbons and a sign proclaiming, "Just married." The drive to the Double C, now their home, was like a journey through a winter wonderland. Snow continued to fall, transforming the landscape into a glistening expanse of white. Blake had draped thick blankets over their laps, and Rosalind nestled against his side, perfectly content. As they approached the ranch, Rosalind gasped in delight. The house was illuminated with lanterns, creating a warm welcome against the snowy night. Mrs. Abernathy had clearly been busy during the celebration, preparing the house for their return. Blake helped Rosalind from the buggy, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," he said, carrying her across the threshold. Inside, a fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, and the scent of fresh pine boughs filled the air. Mrs. Abernathy had left a note saying she would return the next day, giving the newlyweds privacy on their first night as husband and wife. Blake set Rosalind gently on her feet, his eyes never leaving hers. "I still can't believe you're really mine," he said softly. Rosalind reached up to caress his face. "I am. Now and always." Later, as they lay in each other's arms in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Blake pressed a gentle kiss to Rosalind's forehead. "Any regrets?" he whispered. "Not one," she replied truthfully. "Though I do worry sometimes." "About what, my love?" Rosalind hesitated, then decided to voice the fear that occasionally troubled her. "That I'm not what you deserve. You're so good, Blake, so kind and honorable. And I came here with nothing, no dowry, no family connections, nothing to offer but myself." Blake raised himself on one elbow, looking down at her with an expression of tender astonishment. "I'm not what you deserve," she said, her voice barely audible. The cowboy replied with quiet conviction, "You're exactly what I've prayed for." Tears filled Rosalind's eyes at his words. Blake gathered her close, his voice rough with emotion. "Every night for years, I asked God to send me someone to share this life with, someone strong enough for the challenges of the frontier, but gentle enough to make this house a home. Someone who would love this land as I do, who would stand beside me through whatever came our way." He kissed her softly. "And then there you were, standing by that creek at sunset." "My prayer answered." Rosalind buried her face against his chest, overwhelmed by the depth of his love. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that faith." "You already are," Blake assured her, holding her close as they drifted toward sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Spring came early to Montana Territory in 1876, bringing with it new life and new beginnings. The Double C Ranch flourished under Blake's careful management, and Rosalind divided her time between teaching at the schoolhouse and creating a true home at the ranch. On a warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rosalind took Blake's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said softly. Blake's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to pure joy in the span of heartbeats. "A baby? You're certain?" Rosalind nodded, her own happiness reflected in her smile. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. By Christmas we'll be 3. Blake whooped with delight, lifting Rosalind from her chair and spinning her around before setting her down carefully. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with awe. "Our child." They shared the news with their closest friends the following Sunday after church. Sarah and Mrs. Abernathy immediately began planning baby clothes and blankets, while Robert and the other men slapped Blake on the back in congratulation. The months that followed were filled with preparations. Blake built a beautiful cradle from wood he'd been saving for a special project, and Mrs. Abernathy unearthed baby clothes she'd packed away decades ago, saying she'd always hoped to see them used again. Rosalind continued teaching until November, when the school board insisted she take leave earlier than planned due to an early winter storm that made the daily journey to town increasingly difficult. Her students presented her with a handmade quilt, each child having contributed a square embroidered with their name and a small picture. On Christmas Eve, as a blizzard raged outside, Rosalind went into labor. Blake sent one of the ranch hands for the doctor, but it was clear the storm would prevent his arrival in time. Mrs. Abernathy, who had assisted at many births over the years, took charge calmly. "Don't you worry," she assured the anxious couple. "Babies have been coming into this world since long before doctors, and this one will arrive just fine." After hours of labor, just as Christmas Day dawned, Rosalind gave birth to a healthy baby boy with his father's blue eyes and a shock of his mother's auburn hair. Blake, who had refused to leave his wife's side throughout the ordeal, wept unashamedly as Mrs. Abernathy placed the tiny bundle in his arms. "What shall we call him?" Rosalind asked, exhausted but radiant. Blake gazed down at his son with infinite tenderness. "How about Samuel, after your uncle?" "Samuel Blake Callahan." "It's perfect," Rosalind agreed, her heart so full of love she thought it might burst. The blizzard continued for 3 days, creating a cocoon of peace around the new family. When it finally cleared, Dr. Wilson made his way to the ranch, pronouncing both mother and child in excellent health. News of Samuel's birth spread quickly through the community, and visitors soon began arriving with gifts and good wishes. The Jenkins were among the first, Sarah immediately claiming honorary grandmother status to the delight of both new parents. As spring returned to the land, Samuel grew strong and healthy, adored by his parents and the entire community. Rosalind resumed teaching in the fall, bringing Samuel with her to the delight of her students, who took turns helping care for the baby during lessons. Life settled into a rhythm of work and joy for the Callahan family. Blake continued to expand the ranch, buying adjacent land when possible and increasing his herd of cattle. Rosalind balanced teaching, motherhood, and her duties as a rancher's wife with grace and determination. When Samuel was 3, Blake took Rosalind back to the lake where he had proposed. As they watched their son toddle along the shore, fascinated by the water and stones, Blake put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't come west?" he asked. "Or if I hadn't ridden by the creek that evening?" Rosalind leaned into his embrace. "Sometimes. But then I look at our life now, Samuel, our home, and I know this is exactly where I'm meant to be." Blake kissed her temple. "God knew what he was doing when he led us to each other." "He certainly did," Rosalind agreed, her heart full as she watched her son laugh in delight at discovering a frog. "And I'm grateful every day." 2 years later, the Callahan family welcomed a daughter, Rose Elizabeth, born on a perfect summer morning with far less drama than her brother's arrival. Samuel, now 5, took his role as big brother very seriously, solemnly promising his father to always protect his little sister. As the years passed, the Double C Ranch became known throughout the territory not just for its fine cattle and horses, but also for the warmth and hospitality of the family who called it home. Travelers, neighbors, and friends alike were always welcome at the Callahan table, where laughter and good conversation were as plentiful as the food. Rosalind continued teaching until the school board hired a younger teacher from back east, allowing her to focus on her growing family and the increasing responsibilities of the ranch. She began writing articles for a women's magazine in St. Louis, sharing stories of frontier life that quickly gained popularity among readers curious about the West. Blake's reputation as a fair and honorable businessman grew, and he was eventually elected to the territorial legislature, where he advocated tirelessly for the rights of small ranchers and farmers. Though the position required occasional travel to Helena, he always returned to the Double C as quickly as possible, unwilling to be away from his family for long. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Blake surprised Rosalind with a trip to Boston, her first return to her hometown since leaving all those years ago. They took Samuel, now 19 and studying law, and Rose, 16, and the image of her mother at that age. The city had changed, growing larger and more industrial than Rosalind remembered. While she enjoyed showing her family the places of her youth, she found herself increasingly eager to return to Montana. "It's beautiful here," Rose commented as they walked through the public garden. "But it doesn't feel like home." "No," Rosalind agreed, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Our home is under that big Montana sky." Blake, overhearing, smiled at his wife. "Best decision I ever made, riding by that creek at sunset." "Best decision I ever made, accepting a ride from a handsome cowboy," Rosalind countered, her eyes twinkling. They returned to the Double C in time for the spring roundup, slipping back into the rhythms of ranch life with contentment. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a tradition they had maintained throughout their marriage, Blake took Rosalind's hand. "Happy?" he asked, the question he had posed countless times over the years. "Completely," she replied, the answer always the same and always true. "You?" Blake's smile was as warm and genuine as it had been on their wedding day. "More than I ever dreamed possible." As darkness fell over the land they both loved, Rosalind rested her head on her husband's shoulder, grateful for the twists of fate that had brought her to Whispering Creek and into the arms of the man who had shown her the true meaning of home, of family, and of love that endures through all of life's seasons. In the years that followed, the Callahan legacy continued to grow. Samuel returned from law school to practice in Whispering Creek, eventually marrying the daughter of a neighboring rancher and building his own home on Double C land. Rose, with her mother's intelligence and her father's determination, became a respected writer whose stories of frontier life helped shape the nation's understanding of the West. Blake and Rosalind watched with pride as their children built their own lives, secure in the knowledge that the values they had instilled, honesty, hard work, compassion, and unwavering love, would continue for generations to come. And on quiet evenings, they still sat together on the porch of the home they had built, hands intertwined, watching the Montana sunset paint the sky in breathtaking colors. In those moments, they would sometimes recall the words spoken so long ago. "I'm not what you deserve," she had said. "You're exactly what I've prayed for," he had replied. And they both knew, with the certainty that comes from a lifetime of love, that it had been true from the very beginning.